demonizing sugar and the opposite of shifting profit instead of actually finding a balanced solution. There has been a lot of talk about diet, including, excluding certain points, and it is necessary to look at the common sense points around this so that one do not end up harming your organs just in the interest of profiting in how you look and losing weight. You may be one that is designed to have weight. Having weight or not having weight or fat is only the result of a self-interested society. The functioning of the physical body, though, do not work according to how you look. It functions according to a biochemical process. It is a process that is based on a designed reality, and it's not the same for everyone, but the basic principles are the same for everyone. If you obviously have damaged organs, or liver disease, for instance, you will have specific reactions to food and food changes, but you cannot use yourself as a benchmark because your organs are not functioning normally. If others would follow your example, they may cause the same harm or another form of harm simply because they're benchmarking their body to a body that's already damaged. That one should be careful for. So let's look at the whole point. In Sugar the Bitter Truth, the presenter is a pediatrician. That means it's somebody that works with children. That means it's somebody that works with new bodies before or in the beginning stages of damage. And what is clearly explained is that the body requires glucose, which is a sugar, which normally would come from various sources, but one of them is carbohydrates. And that the demon in the sugar family is the fructose, and that which brings fructose if it is not balanced with enough fiber intake. And that if you look at the biochemical processes, it is, regardless of what you eat, there's going to be a little bit of damage from everything you do. So one's got to go and look at these things very carefully and great self-honesty, so that you do not end up placing yourself on the one or the other end of a situation, but rather at a point that is going to support your body effectively. So in this whole scenario, we have a lab rat on the farm, which is Paul, 6 years, type 1 diabetic, and therefore he is subject to insulin injections. And we adjusted the meals from a morning carbohydrate, an evening no carbohydrate, which caused immediately a side effect. And even with him doing less than normal insulin, he ended up the next morning, in spite of trying to build up the point with fruit during the night, at a very low level of sugar. And that obviously is dangerous in itself. And furthermore, some interesting research that one should consider. In a keto, is it the ketones?
Yep.
In a ketogenic scenario where you're burning fat, there is a side effect that the body is producing more acid, and that the ketones in fact is quite poisonous when it reaches the bloodstream. So there is certain points that one should consider around the biochemistry of the ketogenic point to be able to find a balanced point. It will have an effect, a ketogenic point, on the creation of insulin, because if you are no longer creating this or taking in the sugar, which is from which the insulin response would come, and you do that over a long period of time, you are sending a message biochemically to your body that you no longer requires so much insulin, or even insulin at all. Depending on the level that you have been involved in this, your body will respond differently. There are no hard and fast rules with these things. You have to understand that your communication within the body is a chemical communication. It is one of action response, so to speak, because you place in somebody, the body responds to it, and therefore you train your body over time to do certain things. And from this perspective, we've been testing the whole sugar point over time to look at finding a balance, especially because we have a lab rat here, and looking at how to balance the point. One of the important things about cellular construction, that means how your body constructs new cells, is that it requires fiber. And therefore one must take in enough fiber every day, otherwise obviously, commonsensically, if you do not have enough of the material from which something is built, and you use minimal material, you're going to end up with a weaker product. That means if you don't take in enough fiber, your cells will get weaker, and that could have various side effects that will cause long-term effects. And remember, we're not talking now at short-term effects. We're only lucky enough to have a lab rat here that gives us immediate feedback in terms of any change in diet and how the body responds to it, how the effect of the insulin is on it, and whether the change actually affects the body effectively. So if we go back to the beginning with Paul's diabetic process, before he was diagnosed as a diabetic, his body was eating fat, and when there were no more fat, it was eating flesh. So he ended up very thin, in a dangerous position, so much so that they had to take him overnight by ambulance to the hospital, when they realized the real problem was not that he was losing weight. The real problem was that he wasn't producing insulin. So the body was still surviving because it was eating first the fat and then the flesh, and that kind of created the smoke screen that it's still functioning. I mean, it must be some other disease, while at the end of the day, it was actually the insulin that wasn't produced. And very quickly, after insulin was introduced, his body returned to normal weight and started functioning normally. So you've got to be really careful what you're playing with here in terms of this whole point and the potential damage to it. It's important to realize that all parts within the body exist because it is functional within the system that you are existing in. You cannot sidestep what is here without having a side effect that will affect your life extensively. In the case of Paul, for instance, he took in too much fructose-based sugar, and he took it in conjunction with sport. Then he stopped sport, but he didn't stop the sugar point. And the sugar he was taking in was not the glucose part, it was the fructose part, the refined sugar that is coming out of all kinds of other things like corn syrup, and that caused massive damage to his organ. And by the age of 16, he was a type 1 diabetic. Now, the exact nature of these things are very difficult to establish because no proper records are kept of any person in this world at this stage to be able to build up a database from which we can have a complete trustworthy view of every situation in the context of the total physical, biochemical being, so that we can establish nutrition that's best for all based on a few simple considerations like blood type, sugar levels, intake, speed of digestion, effectiveness of absorption, and all the kind of things that is important. So I would suggest that one do not make any drastic changes to anything. A suggested point to change is to reduce your sugar intake from the perspective of plain sugars, and from that perspective increase your fiber intake, have your fat intake in so that there is a balance between the point, reduce your fructose in every way possible. Understand though that the fructose from fruit is quite fine because it's balanced by the fiber that's in the fruit. So fruit is in fact a balanced example of how nature takes care of the systems that's here. So fruit will give you a balanced product which is low fructose, high fiber, and that does not have the damaging effect of high fructose, low fiber. So please slow down, make sure that you do all the research and do not just look at the fact that you are losing weight. The beginning stages of a diabetic is losing weight, so that is a horrific thing to go through. We are watching Paul's life. His life is now in the hand of a needle and a sugar meter, and regardless of him eating fat, he can't survive. He needs the sugar. The body will not function without the glucose coming in. You need some of it. It is a problem situation. And obviously also the acid point, too much fat will again cause problems to your gallbladder over time, not immediately. You will have immediately a result that supports your desire, and that is to lose weight. But in losing weight, you are only presenting to yourself the image and likeness of the consumerism system, the modeling system. You're only producing that, and you may even feel good from the perspective of having a better sex life. I mean, you eat more meat, you're going to have more sex. That is a fascinating side effect of more meat. It's not a side effect of anything else. It's just meat will cause that. And therefore, look at things with common sense, consideration. Do not make drastic changes without considering the long-term side effects and the fact that you can't really predict the actual outcomes. In time, when we get to it, we will do proper research, and from that perspective, do what's best. Do not completely remove your glucose intake so that you end up with other problems unforeseen, like an insulin production drop that cause damage, or a ketogenic acid, was it keto?
Ketoacidosis?
Ketoacidosis. This is what Paul says, ketoacidosis, which is the acid result that happens, and especially is very dangerous for diabetics. That could cause like a toxic shock, as I understand it. So careful. Also make sure before you start a diet that you go and measure your sugar over a period of time to see how you are dealing with the situation. That means, how is your insulin production? And do not jump in to long-term troubles. We did this interview. Paul will in time write more and more on all the things. He's an expert on having a dysfunctional organ, and one can learn from that. it is not something suggested for anyone. Demonizing sugar and the opposite of shifting profit instead of actually finding a balanced solution. There has been a lot of talk about diet, including, excluding certain points, and it is necessary to look at the common sense points around this so that one do not end up harming your organs just in the interest of profiting in how you look and losing weight. You may be one that is designed to have weight. Having weight or not having weight or fat is only the result of a self-interested society. The functioning of the physical body, though, do not work according to how you look. It functions according to a biochemical process. It is a process that is based on a designed reality, and it's not the same for everyone, but the basic principles are the same for everyone. If you obviously have damaged organs or liver disease, for instance, you will have specific reactions to food and food changes, but you cannot use yourself as a benchmark because